Daddy, don't let her die. When a single alpha father and his little girl found love in a freezing Omega, a grief-stricken knight finds a dying woman in the woods. His daughter begs him to save her, breaking his vow never to love again. But when her violent betrothed arrives to reclaim his property, the knight must risk everything in deadly combat. What he discovers about love will shock everyone. Chapter 1. Dawn's Cold Training. The clash of steel echoed across Ravenshallow's courtyard as Alpha Gareth crossed swords with his captain. Dawn mist clung to the castle walls while servants hurried past, their eyes averted from the lord who had become legend for his skill and feared for his coldness. "Again," Gareth commanded, his voice carrying no warmth despite the exertion. Sweat beaded on his brow, yet his expression remained carved from stone. The captain, a seasoned warrior named Willem, pressed forward with renewed vigor. From the battlements above, 8-year-old Alara watched through the crenellations. Her small hands gripped the cold stone as she observed the father who seemed more distant than the mountains beyond their lands. She had risen early, hoping to catch his attention before the day's duties consumed him entirely. Gareth's blade work demonstrated precision honed through years of warfare. Each movement flowed into the next with deadly grace, a dance of death that had made him renowned throughout the kingdom. Yet there was something mechanical about his motions, as if his heart had long since departed the battlefield of life. The training session concluded when Willem yielded, breathing heavily. "Your skill improves daily, my lord," he gasped. "Skill without purpose is merely display," Gareth replied, sheathing his sword. He glanced upward and spotted Alara's face disappearing behind the stone. A flicker of something, perhaps regret, crossed his features before vanishing like morning mist. "Sir," ventured Willem, "perhaps the young lady would enjoy watching the training more closely? She seems quite interested in—" "Lady Alara has lessons to attend," Gareth cut him off sharply. "The daughter of Ravenshallow requires education in languages and mathematics, not swordplay." Willem bowed his head, recognizing the dismissal. As the courtyard emptied, Gareth remained alone, staring at the spot where his daughter had been. 3 years had passed since plague claimed his beloved wife, and each day the wall around his heart grew thicker. The castle bells chimed, signaling the start of another day filled with duties that kept him busy enough to avoid thinking about what he had lost, or what he continued to lose through his own choosing. Chapter 2. The Silent Feast. Evening brought the ritual of the Great Hall's supper, though ritual seemed too grand a word for the somber affair it had become. Gareth took his place at the high table while servants arranged the evening meal with quiet efficiency. The hall that once rang with laughter now echoed only with the scrape of utensils and whispered conversations. Alara entered wearing her finest gown, the blue silk that had been her mother's favorite color. She curtsied properly before taking her seat at the table's far end, the distance between father and daughter seeming vast as an ocean, despite the mere 10 feet that separated them. "How were your lessons today?" Gareth asked, without looking up from the parchment spread beside his trencher. His attention remained fixed on reports from his steward about grain stores and tax collections. "Brother Thomas says I read Latin better than boys twice my age," Alara replied, her voice carrying hope that this accomplishment might earn a smile or word of praise. "Adequate," came the response, though Gareth's quill continued scratching across the documents. "Education serves a lady well in managing household accounts." Alara's shoulders sagged slightly. She had hoped for more, perhaps even a question about which texts she had studied, or whether she enjoyed the theological discussions that fascinated her sharp mind. The meat grew cold as Gareth immersed himself in correspondence from neighboring lords. Political alliances required constant attention, trade disputes needed resolution, and the king's latest taxation demands warranted careful response. These matters filled his days and nights, leaving little room for the frivolous concerns of childhood. "Father," Alara ventured again. "The falconer said he saw strange lights in Thornwood Forest. Might we ride out tomorrow to investigate?" This time Gareth did look up, his gray eyes holding the chill of winter storms. The forest holds dangers unsuitable for children. You will remain within the castle walls where protection is assured." The finality in his tone ended the conversation. They finished the meal in silence, broken only by servants clearing dishes and banking the fire. When Alara rose to bid him good night, Gareth had already returned to his papers. "Sleep well, daughter," he said without raising his head. Alone in the great hall, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, Gareth allowed himself one moment of weakness. He touched the empty chair where his wife once sat, then steeled himself against the memory and returned to work. Chapter 3. Into the Forbidden Woods. Morning arrived with unusual urgency as a messenger bearing the royal seal pounded at Ravenshallow's gates. Brother Thomas, the castle's priest and Alara's tutor, brought word to Gareth as he broke his fast in the solar. "Strange lights were seen throughout the northern forests, my lord," the priest reported, his weathered face creased with concern. "3 villages report the same phenomenon. The king requests investigation by his most trusted knights." Gareth set down his ale, mind already calculating the logistics of such a mission. Thornwood Forest stretched for leagues beyond his lands, its depths largely unexplored since the old wars. "How many men witnessed these lights?" "Dozens, sir. They speak of dancing flames that cast no heat, moving between the trees like spirits of the restless dead." The description stirred memories of battlefield tales told by veterans who claimed to have seen impossible things during desperate hours. Gareth dismissed such stories as products of fear and exhaustion, yet the king's interest demanded proper response. "I shall investigate personally," he decided. "Prepare an escort of 6 men." Alara appeared in the doorway at that moment, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Father, might I accompany you? I have never seen the deep forest, and Brother Thomas says knowledge comes through observation as much as books." "Absolutely not," Gareth replied firmly. "The forest presents unknown dangers." "But you said yourself that education serves a lady well," she persisted, displaying the quick wit that reminded him painfully of her mother. "Surely understanding our lands would prove beneficial?" Something in her tone, perhaps the echo of another voice he once treasured, made him pause. For a moment, the wall around his heart cracked slightly. She had asked little of him these past years, accepting his distance with patience beyond her years. "Very well," he found himself saying, surprising them both. "But you remain close to me at all times. The forest's depths hold mysteries better left undisturbed." Alara's face lit with joy so pure it momentarily banished the shadows from the solar. "Thank you, Father. I shall prepare immediately." As she hurried away, Brother Thomas smiled. "The child has her mother's spirit." "That," Gareth replied quietly, "is precisely what I fear." Chapter 4. The Discovery. The patrol set out as midday sun filtered through autumn leaves, painting the forest floor in patterns of gold and amber. Gareth rode his destrier, while Alara sat proudly upon her palfrey, her excitement barely contained as they ventured deeper into Thornwood than she had ever been permitted. The men-at-arms flanked them in protective formation, eyes scanning the shadows for threats both natural and otherwise. Yet the forest seemed strangely peaceful, almost welcoming, as if it had been waiting for their arrival. "Father, look how the light dances between the branches," Alara observed, pointing to sunbeams that created shifting patterns ahead. "It appears almost magical." "Light follows natural laws," Gareth responded, though he too noticed the unusual quality of illumination in these depths. What appears magical often proves merely misunderstood. They had ridden for 2 hours when Willem, scouting ahead, raised his hand in warning. The patrol halted as he dismounted to examine something among the fallen leaves. "My lord," he called, his voice tight with concern. "You should see this." Gareth dismounted and approached, gesturing for Alara to remain with her horse. Among the autumn debris lay a young woman, her clothing torn and stained with dirt and blood. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and her skin held the pallor of approaching death. She's barely alive, Willem reported. Appears to have been traveling alone, though her garments suggest noble birth. Gareth knelt beside the stranger, checking for obvious wounds. She seemed no older than 20, with auburn hair that caught the filtered sunlight and features that spoke of genteel upbringing. What had brought her to die alone in these remote woods? "Father!" Alara's voice rang out with desperate urgency as she dismounted against his orders. "Please, you must save her. Don't let her die here in the cold earth." The girl's plea struck him unexpectedly. Something in her tone, the raw emotion, the absolute faith that he could make a difference, penetrated his carefully maintained detachment. The dying woman's eyes fluttered open for a moment, meeting his gaze with startling intensity. In those depths, he glimpsed pain, fear, and something else he couldn't identify. Then consciousness faded once more. "Prepare a litter," he commanded his men. "We return to Raven's Hollow immediately." Chapter 5. The Stranger's Awakening. Raven's Hollow's guest chambers had not housed a visitor for over 2 years, yet the servants prepared them with practiced efficiency under Gareth's terse commands. The mysterious woman lay pale and still upon the 4-poster bed while the castle's healer, old Magda, tended her wounds and administered herbal drafts. "She suffers from exhaustion and exposure," Magda reported to Gareth, who stood rigid by the window. "A few days of warmth and proper food should restore her strength, God willing." Alara hovered at the bedside, her young face creased with worry. She had insisted on helping tend to the stranger despite Gareth's protests, and her gentle ministrations seemed to bring some comfort to the unconscious woman. "What do you think brought her to the forest?" Alara asked, adjusting the blankets with careful hands. "Misfortune takes many forms," Gareth replied curtly, though his eyes remained fixed on the woman's face. Something about her features seemed familiar, though he felt certain they had never met. 3 days passed before the stranger's fever broke, and consciousness returned. Gareth was reviewing accounts in his solar when Willem brought word that she had awakened and was asking for the lord of the castle. He found her sitting up in bed, supported by pillows, while Alara offered spoonfuls of broth with maternal care that twisted something deep in his chest. The woman's eyes, a striking shade of green, focused on him as he entered. "My lord," she said, her voice hoarse but cultured, "I owe you my life. I am called Lyanna, though I fear I can offer little else by way of introduction." "You require no introduction beyond the debt of hospitality," Gareth replied stiffly. "When your strength returns, we shall arrange safe passage to wherever you call home." "You speak of home as if it were a certainty," Lyanna observed with a sad smile. "Some of us are not blessed with such security." Alara looked between them with interest. "Surely you have family somewhere. Everyone belongs to someone." The wistful comment from his daughter, who clearly felt she belonged to no one, made Gareth's jaw tighten. "Lady Alara, return to your lessons. Our guest requires rest." As they departed, Gareth felt Lyanna's gaze following him, as if she could see through the armor he wore around his heart. Chapter 6. Unwelcome warmth. Against Gareth's explicit instructions for her swift departure, Lyanna's recovery stretched into weeks as Magda insisted she required further convalescence. Whether by accident or design, the stranger began inserting herself into Raven's Hollow's daily rhythms with quiet persistence. She appeared in the kitchens, claiming boredom drove her to seek useful occupation. Within days, she had reorganized the spice stores and improved the bread recipes. The cook, initially suspicious of noble interference, found herself charmed by Lyanna's genuine interest and practical knowledge. "Where did you learn such skills?" Alara asked one afternoon as they worked together in the herb garden. "A lady must understand all aspects of household management," Lyanna replied, her hands gentle among the medicinal plants. "One never knows when circumstances might require such knowledge." Gareth observed these interactions from his solar window, irritation building each time he witnessed his daughter's growing attachment to the stranger. Alara laughed more in Lyanna's presence than she had since her mother's death. but such happiness felt dangerous when built upon temporary foundations. The breaking point came when he discovered them in the chapel, Lyanna teaching Alara a song their mother used to sing. The melody drifted through the stone arches like a ghost from happier days, and for a moment grief threatened to overwhelm his rigid control. "Enough," he said sharply, his entrance causing both females to turn in surprise. "Lady Alara, you have neglected your Latin studies." "But father, Lyanna was teaching me." "Lady Lyanna has imposed upon our hospitality long enough," he interrupted, his voice cold as winter steel. "Tomorrow, arrangements will be made for your departure." Lyanna's face showed no surprise at his pronouncement, only a resigned sadness that somehow made him feel like the villain in his own castle. "Of course, my lord. I shall prepare immediately." That evening, as Alara wept quietly in her chambers, Gareth stood alone in the great hall and wondered why doing the right thing felt so much like cruelty. Chapter 7. Dreams of the Dead. Sleep brought no peace to Gareth that night. Instead, it carried visions of his beloved wife, Eleanor, standing in moonlight that seemed to emanate from her very being. She appeared as she had in life, beautiful, gentle, with eyes that saw straight to his soul. "You have become a stranger to yourself," she said, her voice carrying the music he remembered. "And worse, you have become a stranger to our daughter." "I protect her," Gareth protested, though the words felt hollow even in dreams. "Distance shields her from the pain of loss." "Distance shields no one from anything," Eleanor replied sadly. "It merely ensures that when pain comes, and it always comes, we face it alone." In the dream, she moved closer, and he could smell the lavender she had always worn. Alara needs a father who loves her, not a guardian who fears to care. And you need to remember that love is not weakness, my beloved. It is the only strength that matters. "I loved you," he said, anguish breaking through his defenses. "And I lost you. I cannot bear to love again only to face such devastation." "You lost my body," she corrected gently. "But love itself cannot be lost unless you choose to abandon it. Our daughter needs to see that love is possible, that joy can follow sorrow, that life continues beyond loss." The dream began to fade, but Eleanor's final words rang clear. "The woman you found in the forest was not brought to you by chance. Open your heart, Gareth, before it hardens beyond all redemption." He woke with tears on his cheeks and sunlight streaming through his chamber windows. For the first time in 3 years, he had slept past dawn, and the castle was already bustling with morning activity. Rising quickly, he discovered that Lyanna had risen even earlier. She was already dressed for travel, her few belongings packed in a simple leather satchel. In the courtyard, a horse stood ready for her departure. Alara clung to her skirts, tears streaming down her young face. "Please don't leave us," she pleaded. "Father doesn't mean what he said, he's just forgotten how to be happy." The sight of his daughter's heartbreak struck Gareth like a physical blow, and Eleanor's words echoed in his memory. What kind of father was he if he could watch his child suffer for the sake of his own fear? Chapter 8. The Song of Memory. Gareth stood frozen in the courtyard doorway, watching his daughter's tears while wrestling with emotions he had spent 3 years suppressing. Lyanna knelt beside Alara, gently wiping away the child's tears with a tenderness that reminded him painfully of Eleanor. "Sometimes adults make choices they believe are wise," Lyanna said softly, "even when those choices cause pain. Your father loves you deeply, which is why he tries to protect you from hurt. But I hurt more when people leave," Alara sobbed. "First mother, now you. Why does everyone I love have to go away?" The innocent question hit Gareth like a sword thrust. In his efforts to shield his daughter from loss, he had ensured she experienced it repeatedly. Every servant he had dismissed for growing too close, every potential friend he had turned away, all in the name of protection that protected no one. "My lord," Willem approached quietly, "the horse is ready when Lady Lyanna wishes to depart." Gareth found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "Cancel the escort," he said. Lady Lyanna will not be leaving today." Both Lyanna and Alara turned to stare at him in surprise. His daughter's face transformed with hope, while the woman's expression remained carefully neutral. "I spoke hastily yesterday," he continued, the admission costing him greatly. "Raven's Hollow extends its hospitality as long as you require sanctuary." Alara launched herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him backward. For a moment, he simply held her, remembering what it felt like to comfort rather than command. "Thank you, Father," she whispered against his neck. "Thank you for not sending her away." Over his daughter's head, Gareth met Lyanna's gaze. She studied him with those perceptive green eyes, as if trying to understand what had changed his mind. "I am grateful for your kindness, my lord," she said carefully. "I shall endeavor not to abuse your generosity." Something in her tone suggested she understood this was about more than simple hospitality. Perhaps she had observed enough of Raven's Hollow's dynamics to recognize the significance of his reversal. That evening, as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Gareth found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in years. Chapter 9. Cracks in the Armor. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Raven's Hollow's atmosphere. Laughter echoed through corridors that had been silent too long, and servants moved with lighter steps as warmth returned to the castle's daily rhythms. Lyanna proved herself invaluable in ways Gareth had not anticipated. Her knowledge of herbal medicine aided Magda in treating the ailments that plagued castle folk during the transition to winter. Her skill with numbers helped balance the household accounts that had grown tangled in his distraction. Most importantly, her presence gave Alara the maternal guidance he felt inadequate to provide. Yet these improvements came with a price. Gareth found himself increasingly aware of Lyanna's presence, noticing details he had no business observing. The way sunlight caught the copper highlights in her hair, the gentle authority with which she managed household disputes, the musical quality of her voice when she sang Alara to sleep. Such attention disturbed him greatly. He had built his life around duty and distance, emotions controlled through rigid discipline. This growing awareness threatened the foundations of his carefully ordered existence. The crisis came when he injured himself during sword practice, a moment of inattention that would have been unthinkable in his younger days. Willem's blade found the gap in his defense, slicing deep across his forearm. "Fetch Magda," Willem commanded the watching men-at-arms, but Lyanna appeared before the healer could be summoned. "Let me see," she said, kneeling beside him in the courtyard despite the impropriety of tending a lord's wounds in public. Her hands were gentle as they examined the cut, cool fingers probing for damage while he fought to ignore the unexpected intimacy of her touch. When had he last been cared for rather than simply served? "The wound is clean but deep," she reported, wrapping it efficiently with strips torn from her own kirtle. "You must keep it dry and change the dressing daily." "I require no nursing," he said stiffly, though he made no move to pull away from her ministrations. "Everyone requires care sometimes," she replied, meeting his eyes directly. "Even lords who believe themselves made of stone rather than flesh." The comment was gently spoken, but carried an edge that suggested she saw through his defenses more clearly than he appreciated. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply receive her care without protest or analysis. "Your daughter watches us," Lyanna murmured, nodding toward the castle walls where Alara observed from her favorite window. "She sees too much," Gareth replied, finally pulling his arm away from her gentle touch. "Perhaps she sees exactly what needs to be seen." Chapter 10. Fever's Truth. 3 days later, Alara fell ill with a sudden fever that had Magda muttering prayers and brewing stronger remedies than usual. The child burned with heat while shivering uncontrollably, her young body fighting some infection that defied easy identification. Gareth paced the corridors like a caged wolf, unable to help and unwilling to leave. All his martial skills, his strategic mind, his lord's authority, none of it mattered when faced with his daughter's suffering. The fever must break soon, Magda warned him as dawn approached the second day. if it continues much longer." She did not need to finish the sentence. They had all seen too many die from such illnesses, especially children whose small bodies could not withstand prolonged burning. Liana had not left Alara's bedside, cooling the child's forehead with damp cloths and coaxing sips of medicinal tea past fevered lips. Her vigil continued through day and night while Gareth watched helplessly from the doorway. "You should rest," he told her when the third night arrived with no improvement. "You will collapse from exhaustion." "I cannot leave her," Liana replied without taking her eyes from Alara's flushed face. "She asked me not to go away, and I gave my word." The simple statement revealed the depth of bond that had formed between them. Liana cared for his daughter with the devotion of a mother, asking nothing in return except the chance to continue giving such love. Near dawn of the fourth day, Alara's fever finally broke. She opened clear eyes for the first time in days and looked directly at Liana. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice weak but wondering. "I promised I would," Liana replied, smoothing damp hair from the child's forehead. Some promises must be kept regardless of cost. From his position by the window, Gareth watched this exchange and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The woman he had found dying in the forest had proven herself worthy of trust in the most essential way possible. She had protected what he valued most in the world. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words carrying more weight than such simple syllables should bear. Liana met his gaze across the sick room, and for a moment, he allowed her to see past his defenses to the gratitude and something deeper that he dared not name. Chapter 11. Shadows from the Past. Lord Marcus Blackwood arrived at Ravenshollow on a morning when autumn mist clung to the castle walls like grasping fingers. His retinue of 20 armed men and the cold arrogance in his pale blue eyes immediately set Gareth's instincts on edge. "Lord Gareth," Marcus said with a smile that failed to reach his eyes, "I come seeking something that belongs to me." They met in the great hall, where the morning meal had been interrupted by the unexpected arrival. Liana sat at the lower table with Alara, but Gareth noticed how she had gone pale at the sight of their visitor. "What might you claim ownership of within my lands?" Gareth asked carefully, gesturing for wine to be served despite his growing suspicions. "Not something, but someone," Marcus replied, his gaze moving deliberately to where Liana sat frozen. "My betrothed fled our home 3 months ago, and I have been searching for her ever since." The words fell into the hall like stones dropped into still water. Gareth felt the ripples spread through his chest, disturbing the peace he had only recently begun to experience. "I know of no betrothed guests within Ravenshollow," he said neutrally, though his hand moved instinctively to rest on his sword hilt. "Come now, my lord," Marcus laughed, the sound holding no warmth. "Surely you recognize Lady Liana. She has always been distinctive in her stubborn willfulness." Liana rose slowly, her composure intact, despite the fear Gareth could see in her green eyes. "Lord Marcus," she said with a curtsy that held more defiance than respect, "you travel far from your own lands." "Love compels such journeys," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested emotions far removed from love. When one's betrothed vanishes without explanation, a man must demonstrate his devotion by pursuing her to the ends of the earth. Alara pressed closer to Liana's side, young instincts recognizing a threat, even if she could not understand its nature. The protective gesture stirred something fierce in Gareth's chest. "Perhaps the lady had reasons for her departure," he suggested quietly. Marcus's smile turned sharp as winter ice. Women often act upon fears that exist only in their imagination. My dear Liana sometimes requires guidance in distinguishing between perception and reality. The implications in his tone made Gareth's blood run cold. He had seen enough of war to recognize the signs of a man who enjoyed inflicting pain upon those unable to defend themselves. "Lady Liana is under Ravenshollow's protection," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of absolute decision. She shall remain so as long as she desires. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees as Marcus's facade of civility cracked slightly. I'm afraid that decision is not yours to make, my lord. We were contracted in marriage by our fathers. The church recognizes our union regardless of her temporary confusion. Chapter 12. The Midpoint Choice. That evening, after Marcus and his men had been provided guest quarters despite the obvious tension, Lyanna sought out Gareth in his solar. She moved like a woman walking to her execution, her usual grace replaced by the rigid control of someone fighting terror. Lord Marcus spoke truth about our betrothal, she said without preamble, standing stiffly before his desk. Our fathers arranged the union when I was barely 16. I fled because I could not bear the thought of binding myself to such a man. Gareth set aside the parchments he had been pretending to read. What manner of man is he? The question hung between them for a long moment before Lyanna answered. The kind who believes that fear and submission make suitable foundations for marriage. The kind who thinks a woman's will is something to be broken rather than respected. Her words confirmed his worst suspicions. Has he harmed you? Not yet, she replied quietly. But during our engagement, he made his expectations clear. He enjoys the prospect of having a wife who will cower at his approach. Rage built in Gareth's chest like a fire catching kindling. The thought of this gentle woman subjected to systematic cruelty triggered protective instincts he had thought long dead. You need not return with him, he declared firmly. Raven's Hollow offers you permanent sanctuary. Lyanna's composure finally cracked, revealing the desperate hope she had been hiding. You would defy an arranged marriage? Risk conflict with his family for someone you found dying in the forest? The question forced him to confront feelings he had been avoiding for weeks. This was no longer about simple hospitality or even duty to protect the helpless. Somewhere between her gentle care of his daughter and her quiet integration into their lives, he had begun to care for her in ways that terrified him. Yes, he said simply, the admission costing him more than charging an enemy line ever had. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something she seemed to find. Lord Marcus will not accept such defiance peacefully. He has the law on his side and armed men to enforce it. Then he will discover that Raven's Hollow's walls have withstood stronger enemies than one bitter lord and his mercenaries. The smile that crossed her face transformed her entirely, revealing the woman she might have been if fear had not marked her so deeply. Thank you, she whispered. I never dared hope someone might choose to fight for me rather than against me. In that moment, looking into her grateful eyes, Gareth realized he had crossed a line from which there could be no retreat. He was no longer simply protecting a guest. He was choosing her over safety, love over fear, the possibility of joy over the certainty of solitude. Chapter 13. War's Declaration. Lord Marcus received Gareth's decision with the cold fury of a man unaccustomed to being denied anything he desired. The confrontation took place in the Great Hall with both their retinues present, making it a formal matter of honor rather than private negotiation. You refuse to surrender my lawful betrothed? Marcus asked, his voice deadly quiet. I refuse to force any woman into unwanted marriage, Gareth replied firmly. Lady Lyanna has chosen to remain under Raven's Hollow's protection. Choice? Marcus laughed harshly. What choice does a woman have beyond accepting the arrangements made by wiser heads? Lord Gareth, surely you understand that honoring legal contracts supersedes individual whims. I understand that marriage should require consent from both parties. The revolutionary nature of this statement sent murmurs through the assembled men. In an age where women were traded like property, Gareth's position challenged fundamental assumptions about power and obligation. Your sentiment is admirable but naive, Marcus replied coldly. I come prepared to uphold my legal rights through whatever means prove necessary. The threat was clear, though couched in diplomatic language. Marcus was prepared for war over what he considered his property. As am I, Gareth responded. Raven's Hollow has never surrendered its guests to those who would harm them. Then perhaps we should settle this matter through single combat, Marcus suggested with a smile that revealed his confidence. If you truly believe in your cause, surely you would risk your life to defend it. The challenge struck the hall like lightning. Single combat would resolve the matter with minimal bloodshed while testing the strength of Gareth's convictions against Marcus's claimed rights. I accept, Gareth said without hesitation, though he noticed how Lyanna's face went white with terror. Excellent, Marcus purred. Tomorrow at dawn, then. To the death, of course. Anything less would hardly resolve the matter permanently. As the lords sealed their agreement with formal words, Alara slipped closer to Lyanna's side. The child had understood enough to know her father would be fighting for the woman who had become like a mother to her. That night, as Gareth prepared his weapons and wrote letters to be delivered if he fell, he wondered if he was making the greatest mistake of his life. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered Lyanna's gentle hands tending his daughter's fever, and his resolve strengthened. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. Chapter 14. The night before sleep eluded Gareth as he spent what might be his final night walking Raven's Hollow's battlements under cold stars. The weight of decision pressed down upon him, forcing examination of motives he preferred to leave unanalyzed. Was he fighting for justice, or had something deeper driven him to this desperate choice? The honest answer disturbed him more than the prospect of death at dawn. Father? Alara's voice came from behind him, small and frightened in the darkness. He turned to find her wrapped in a heavy cloak, her young face creased with worry beyond her years. You should be sleeping, daughter. I cannot sleep knowing you might not return tomorrow, she said, moving to stand beside him at the wall. Are you truly willing to die for Lyanna? The directness of her question demanded equal honesty in response. I am willing to die to protect what matters most to me. And what matters most to you? He looked down at his daughter, this brave, intelligent child who had grown up too quickly after losing her mother. Behind them, somewhere in the castle's warm chambers, Lyanna waited for dawn with the patience of someone who had learned to expect little from life but cherish what gifts came. You, he said simply, and the possibility that we might be a family again instead of two people sharing the same walls. Alara nodded gravely. Then you must win tomorrow because I cannot bear to lose another parent. Her words hit him like a physical blow. In his determination to protect her from loss, he had created the possibility of inflicting upon her the very pain he sought to prevent. I will fight with everything I possess, he promised, gathering her into his arms. But Alara, if something happens to me— Nothing will happen, she interrupted fiercely. You are the best knight in the kingdom and you fight for love. That makes you stronger than someone who fights only for possession. From the mouths of children, he thought, came wisdom that escaped their elders. Perhaps Alara understood something about the nature of strength that his warrior's training had never taught him. They stood together in comfortable silence until the cold drove them back inside. As they parted at her chamber door, Alara caught his hand. Father, when you win tomorrow, will you marry Lyanna and make us a proper family? The question caught him completely off guard, though perhaps it should not have. Children saw truths that adults clouded with complexity and fear. Would that please you? He asked carefully. More than anything in the world, she replied without hesitation. As Gareth made his way to his own chambers, he carried his daughter's words like a talisman against the darkness ahead. Chapter 15. Dawn's Judgment. The castle courtyard filled with witnesses as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Lord Marcus arrived resplendent in polished mail, his sword gleaming with the confidence of a man who had never lost a duel. His supporters gathered behind him, already celebrating an anticipated victory. Gareth emerged wearing his battle-tested armor, the steel scarred from countless conflicts but proven reliable when life depended upon its protection. Willem helped adjust the straps while offering final words of tactical advice that both men knew meant little when facing an unknown opponent's skills. From the castle steps, Lyanna watched with Alara pressed close to her side. The woman's face showed carefully controlled fear while the child displayed absolute faith in her father's abilities. Their presence reminded Gareth why this battle mattered more than any he had previously fought. "My lords," called Father Benedict, the traveling priest who would oversee the combat, "state your intentions before God and these witnesses." "I fight to reclaim property stolen from me," Marcus declared loudly. "The woman known as Lyanna was pledged to me in marriage and shall return to fulfill that obligation." "I fight to protect an innocent woman's right to choose her own path," Gareth replied with equal volume. "No law justifies forcing unwilling souls into bondage. Then let God's will be revealed through strength of arms," the priest intoned. "Fight with honor until one yields or falls." The combatants saluted each other with ritual courtesy before taking positions 20 paces apart. Marcus drew his blade with a flourish designed to intimidate, while Gareth's sword emerged smoothly from its scabbard like an extension of his arm. "Ready?" Father Benedict called. Both men nodded their assent. "Begin!" Marcus attacked immediately, seeking to end the contest through overwhelming aggression. His sword work revealed extensive training and natural talent, each strike calculated to exploit openings while creating new opportunities for follow-up attacks. Gareth gave ground initially, studying his opponent's patterns while testing his own defenses against this unfamiliar style. Marcus favored power over finesse, using his considerable size advantage to press forward with relentless pressure. The duel settled into deadly rhythm as steel rang against steel under the rising sun. Both men were skilled, but their approaches differed fundamentally. Marcus fought to dominate while Gareth fought to protect, and that distinction began to show in their techniques as the combat progressed. "Yield now, and I may allow you to live," Marcus panted during a brief separation. "Never," Gareth replied, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. The battle resumed with increased intensity as both warriors recognized this would not end quickly. Chapter 16. Steel and Determination. Sweat stung Gareth's eyes as the duel entered its second phase, both combatants having tested each other's defenses and found them formidable. Marcus proved every bit as dangerous as his reputation suggested, combining raw strength with cunning that spoke of battles won through whatever means necessary. A powerful overhead strike nearly broke Gareth's guard, the impact reverberating through his arms and shoulders. He pivoted away from the follow-up thrust, Marcus's blade missing his ribs by mere inches as he felt the steel part the air beside him. "Growing tired already?" Marcus taunted, though his own breathing came heavier now. Perhaps age has dulled the legendary Alpha Gareth's edge. Gareth ignored the provocation, focusing instead on the subtle tells that revealed his opponent's intentions. Marcus favored his right side, suggesting an old wound that limited flexibility. His attacks followed predictable patterns when pressed, falling back on combinations that had served him well in previous encounters. The crowd had grown silent except for the ring of steel and scrape of boots on stone. Even the servants had emerged to witness this contest that would determine their lady's fate. Marcus launched a series of rapid strikes that forced Gareth backward toward the castle wall. The positioning was deliberate. With stone behind him, retreat became impossible and any stumble could prove fatal. "This ends now," Marcus snarled, raising his sword for a killing blow. But Gareth had been waiting for exactly this moment of overconfidence. Instead of retreating further, he stepped forward into the attack, catching Marcus's descending blade on his crossguard while driving his knee into his opponent's exposed side. Marcus staggered, his perfect form disrupted by pain and surprise. For the first time since the duel began, uncertainty flickered in his cold blue eyes. "You fight for possession," Gareth said quietly as they circled each other again. "I fight for love. That makes all the difference." The next exchange proved more even as both men sought decisive advantage. Steel sparked against steel while they tested each other's limits, neither willing to yield ground that might prove crucial. From the crowd, Gareth could hear Alara's voice calling encouragement. "Win, father! Fight for us!" The innocent faith in those words strengthened his resolve. This was no longer about personal honor or even justice. It was about protecting the family he had discovered was worth any sacrifice. Marcus sensed the shift in his opponent's intensity and pressed his own attack with desperate fury. If he could not win through skill alone, he would seek victory through whatever advantages remained available. The crowd gasped as Marcus's blade found its mark, slicing across Gareth's sword arm and sending crimson streaming down his mail. The wound weakened his grip, but did not disable him entirely. "First blood to me," Marcus grinned savagely. "Surrender now and spare yourself further humiliation." Instead of yielding, Gareth shifted his sword to a two-handed grip and pressed forward with renewed aggression. Pain could be endured, but failure could not. Chapter 17. The turning tide blood loss began to affect Gareth's coordination as the duel stretched beyond its first hour. His wounded arm throbbed with each heartbeat, while sweat mixed with crimson to sting his eyes and blur his vision at crucial moments. Marcus recognized his advantage and exploited it ruthlessly, targeting the injured limb with strikes designed to worsen the damage. His blade work grew more vicious as victory appeared within reach, honor forgotten in favor of certain triumph. "Your strength fails you," Marcus observed with cruel satisfaction. "Soon you will collapse, and I shall claim what was promised to me from the beginning." From her position on the castle steps, Lyanna watched with anguish etched across her features. She had never asked anyone to risk their life for her freedom, yet here was this good man bleeding in the dust because he believed her worth protecting. Elara stood frozen beside her, young hands clenched into fists as she watched her father struggle against an opponent who showed no mercy. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice remained strong. "Get up, father! You promised you would not leave me!" The child's plea penetrated Gareth's growing exhaustion like sunlight through storm clouds. He had indeed made that promise, and promises to daughters were sacred things not to be broken lightly. Drawing upon reserves he had not known existed, Gareth found his second wind in the most unexpected place, not in anger or desperation, but in love. Love for the brave child who believed in him absolutely. Love for the gentle woman who had brought warmth back to their cold castle. Love for the family they might become if he could endure this trial. His counterattack caught Marcus off guard, a series of precise strikes that forced the larger man backward despite his apparent advantage. Where Marcus fought with hate and possessiveness, Gareth fought with protective devotion, and that difference began to show. "Impossible," Marcus snarled as his confidence wavered. "You should be finished by now." "Love provides strength that hatred cannot match," Gareth replied, his voice steady, despite the pain radiating from his wounded arm. The tide of battle shifted as Marcus's carefully planned victory began to slip away. His breathing grew labored, while Gareth seemed to gain energy from sources beyond physical endurance. In desperation, Marcus attempted a dishonorable strike below the belt, a move that would have ended the duel through crippling injury rather than honest defeat. But Gareth had anticipated such treachery from a man who viewed women as property to be claimed. The deflection opened Marcus to a riposte that found its mark along his ribs, steel-parting mail links to draw first blood from the previously untouched lord. Now both men bled, but only one fought for something greater than personal pride. "You cannot win," Marcus gasped, though his words carried less conviction than before. "I am younger, stronger, fresher than you." "Perhaps," Gareth acknowledged, pressing his advantage as Marcus's guard faltered. "But you fight alone, while I fight for two people who mean more to me than my own life." The psychological pressure proved as devastating as any physical blow. Chapter 18. Love's Victory. The duel's climax arrived with sudden violence as both men committed everything to final exchanges that would determine the outcome. Marcus, sensing his advantage slipping away, abandoned all pretense of honorable combat in favor of desperate measures. He feinted high, then swept low, seeking to hamstring Gareth and end the contest through disabling rather than defeating his opponent. The move was skillfully executed, but telegraphed by the panic creeping into Marcus's attacks as assured victory, transformed into uncertain struggle. Gareth recognized the deception and responded with a technique learned in his youth but rarely employed, a risky maneuver that required perfect timing and absolute commitment. Instead of defending against the false attack, he stepped forward into Marcus's true strike while bringing his own blade around in a horizontal arc. Steel met flesh with a sound that carried clearly across the silent courtyard. Marcus's sword clattered to the stones as his hand went numb from the blow that had struck his wrist with precision that spoke of years spent mastering the warrior's craft. "Yield," Gareth commanded, his sword point resting against his opponent's throat while blood dripped from both men's wounds. Marcus glared up at him with hatred undimmed by defeat. "I will never yield what is rightfully mine." "Then you understand nothing about what makes something truly yours," Gareth replied sadly. "Love cannot be owned, only given freely. Lyanna was never your property to claim." The philosophical distinction was lost on Marcus, whose worldview recognized only possession and dominance as valid relationships between strong and weak. Yet the sword at his throat provided a compelling argument for accepting terms he would never embrace willingly. "I yield the field," he said through gritted teeth, the words obviously costing him enormous effort. Gareth stepped back and lowered his weapon, though he remained alert for treachery from a man who had already demonstrated his willingness to abandon honor for advantage. "The contest is decided," Father Benedict declared to the watching crowd. "Alpha Gareth holds the field, and his claim is validated by trial of combat." A cheer rose from the castle's inhabitants as their lord's victory became official. But Gareth's attention focused entirely on the two figures running toward him from the castle steps. Alara reached him first, launching herself into his arms with force that nearly knocked him backward. "You won! You kept your promise!" "I did indeed," he murmured against her hair, holding her close while his heart gradually slowed from battle rhythm to something approaching normal. Lyanna approached more carefully, her green eyes bright with tears of relief and something deeper that made his chest tighten with emotions he was finally ready to acknowledge. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying weight that formal gratitude could never encompass. "Thank you," he replied, understanding that she had given him something far more valuable than he had given her. "You brought life back to a dead man's heart." As Marcus and his men departed in sullen defeat, Gareth stood in his own courtyard surrounded by the people who mattered most and finally understood what victory truly meant. Chapter 19. Hearts Unveiled. The days following the duel brought a transformation to Ravenshollow that extended far beyond Marcus's departure. The victory had lifted a shadow that Gareth was only now realizing had darkened every corner of the castle for 3 long years. His wounded arm healed slowly under Lyanna's careful tending, though he suspected she prolonged the treatment to maintain their excuse for spending time together. Not that he minded. Her gentle ministrations provided opportunities for conversation that revealed depths to her character he had only glimpsed before. "You fought magnificently," she said one evening, as she changed his bandages in the solar's quiet warmth. "Though I confess I feared for your life when you began bleeding so heavily." "I had excellent motivation to survive," he replied, allowing himself to study her face in the candlelight. "A man cannot abandon his daughter or the woman who has brought joy back to their lives." The admission hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Lyanna's hands stilled in their work as she met his gaze directly. "Is that what I have done? Brought joy to your life?" "More than I thought possible after Eleanor's death," he admitted with honesty that would have terrified him weeks earlier. "You have reminded me that hearts can heal if given reason to hope." "And do you? Hope, I mean?" The question required an answer on multiple levels. Hope for what? Healing from past wounds, possibility of future happiness, the courage to risk loving again despite knowing how devastating loss could be? "I hope," he said carefully, "that you might consider remaining at Raven's Hollow permanently. Not as a guest or refugee, but as—" He paused, gathering courage for words that would change everything. "As my wife, if you would honor me by accepting such a proposal." Leanna's intake of breath was sharp in the quiet room. "Marriage? You would truly wish to marry a woman with no lands, no dowry, nothing but the gratitude of someone you saved from a terrible fate?" "I would wish to marry the woman who saved my daughter from motherless loneliness and myself from joyless existence," he corrected gently. "Your worth cannot be measured in gold or acres." Tears gathered in her green eyes, though whether from happiness or sorrow he could not determine. "Gareth, I must tell you something that may change your feelings entirely." The serious tone in her voice sent alarm through his chest. What secret could be so terrible? I cannot." She struggled with words before forcing herself to continue. "I may not be able to give you sons. There was an accident during my youth, and the physician said—" Understanding dawned, along with relief that her concern was something so easily dismissed. "Leanna, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he saw the vulnerability of someone expecting rejection based on perceived inadequacy. "I have a daughter who needs a mother more than I need additional heirs," he said firmly. "If God blesses us with more children, I shall rejoice. If not, Alara alone is a gift enough for any man." "You truly mean that?" "I mean every word." The kiss that followed was tentative at first, then deeper as 3 years of loneliness and recent weeks of growing affection found expression in touch that promised everything words could not convey. Chapter 20. A Father's Joy. Alara's reaction to news of the engagement exceeded even Gareth's expectations for enthusiasm. The child literally danced around the chamber when informed that Leanna would become her stepmother, her joy so pure it brought tears to both adults' eyes. "When will the wedding be?" she demanded, already planning celebrations that would dwarf anything Raven's Hollow had seen in recent memory. "May I help choose your dress? Can we have musicians and dancing and a feast that lasts for days?" "The wedding will be as elaborate as you desire," Gareth promised, his own happiness reflected in his daughter's excitement. "This will be a celebration worthy of the joy we all feel." Leanna laughed at the child's exuberance while Gareth marveled at the sound, rich, musical, completely uninhibited by the fear that had marked her first weeks in their home. Marcus's defeat had freed her from more than immediate threat. It had allowed her true nature to emerge. "There is one tradition I should like to observe," Leanna said, when Alara's initial excitement had settled into productive planning. "In my family, betrothed couples exchanged personal tokens as symbols of their commitment." "What manner of tokens?" Gareth asked, intrigued by this glimpse into customs he had never encountered. "Something that represents what the giver treasures most," she explained. "Not valuable in gold, but precious for deeper reasons." The tradition appealed to him immediately. Their relationship had been built on emotional rather than material foundations. It seemed appropriate that their engagement gifts should reflect those values. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and rose, they met in the castle's herb garden where Leanna had spent so many hours bringing order to neglected plots. The setting held significance for both of them. This was where she had first demonstrated her worth through service rather than words. "I have chosen my token," Gareth said, producing a small object wrapped in silk. "This was my mother's ring, passed down through generations of Raven's Hollow ladies. It has no great value in gold, but it represents the love that has blessed this house for centuries." Leanna unwrapped the silk to reveal a simple band set with garnets that caught the dying light like drops of blood. "It's beautiful," she whispered, slipping it onto her finger where it fit as if made for her hand. "And I have chosen this," she said, offering him a small leather pouch. "It contains seeds from my family's garden, herbs that have grown on our lands for generations. Plant them here, and our histories will grow together as we do." The symbolism struck him deeply. She was offering not just herself, but her heritage, asking him to nurture something precious that would flourish in Ravenshallow's soil as she herself had done. "I will plant them with my own hands," he promised, "and tend them as carefully as I shall tend your happiness." As they stood together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the scents of rosemary and lavender, Gareth felt the last walls around his heart crumble completely. The man who had sworn never to love again had discovered that some bonds were worth any risk. Chapter 21. Preparations for Forever Wedding. Preparations consumed Ravenshallow with an energy that transformed the castle from fortress into celebration. Servants who had moved quietly through their duties for 3 years now bustled with purpose, their excitement infectious as they prepared for the first joyous occasion the hall had witnessed since Eleanor's death. Elara appointed herself chief coordinator of festivities, her natural authority surprising everyone, including her father. She consulted with the cook about feast menus, directed seamstresses in decorating the Great Hall, and composed invitation lists that included every soul within a day's ride of Ravenshallow. "She has her mother's talent for bringing people together," Gareth observed one evening as he watched his daughter organize yet another aspect of the upcoming celebration. "She has her father's determination," Lyanna replied with a smile. "Once she commits to a goal, nothing will deter her from achieving it." The comparison pleased him more than elaborate compliments could have managed. To see his own positive qualities reflected in Elara gave hope that he had not failed entirely as a parent during those difficult years of emotional distance. Wedding gifts began arriving from neighboring lords who had heard news of Alpha Gareth's unusual courtship and victory in trial by combat. Most brought traditional offerings, silver plates, fine tapestries, breeding stock for Ravenshallow's herds, but a few packages contained more personal items that suggested genuine affection for the groom. Lord William of Westmarch, Gareth's closest friend from their youth, sent a case of wine laid down the year Eleanor died with a note explaining he had been saving it for the day Gareth found happiness again. The gesture moved both bride and groom to tears. "You have friends who care deeply for your welfare," Lyanna observed as they read the accompanying letter filled with warm wishes and gentle humor. "I had forgotten," Gareth admitted. "For so long I pushed everyone away, convinced that distance protected both them and me from pain. I am only now realizing how much I sacrificed in the name of such protection. The past cannot be changed," she said gently, "but the future remains ours to write. Your friends forgive whatever distance you maintained because they understand grief makes us do things we later regret." Her wisdom continued to surprise him. Despite her youth and the traumas she had endured, Lyanna possessed insight into human nature that helped him understand his own behavior with clarity he had never achieved alone. The dress fitting provided another revelation. Lyanna had insisted on simple elegance rather than elaborate display, choosing cream silk adorned with embroidery that Elara helped design. When she emerged from the seamstress's chambers for final adjustments, Gareth felt his breath catch in his throat. "You are beautiful," he said simply, the words inadequate to express the emotion that overwhelmed him. "I am happy," she corrected with a radiant smile. Happiness makes everyone beautiful. 3 days before the wedding, they received unexpected visitors that would make their celebration complete. Chapter 22. Blessing from the Past. Brother Thomas arrived at sunset with a companion whose presence struck Gareth like lightning from clear skies. Lady Margaret, Eleanor's elder sister, had traveled from her convent to attend a wedding she proclaimed both surprising and necessary. "Gareth," she said warmly, embracing him with affection that transcended the awkwardness of their long separation. "Eleanor visits me in dreams sometimes, and she is well pleased with your choice." The statement might have been dismissed as polite sentiment from anyone else, but Margaret had always possessed an otherworldly quality that made such pronouncements seem entirely plausible. If anyone could communicate with the dead, It would be this serene woman who had devoted her life to prayer and contemplation. "She approves?" he asked, needing that assurance more than he had realized. "She rejoices," Margaret corrected gently. "Eleanor knows that love multiplies rather than diminishes when shared. The love you bore her does not lessen because you have found room in your heart for another." Lyanna had withdrawn slightly during this exchange, uncertain of her place in conversations about Gareth's first wife, but Margaret drew her forward with gentle authority. "Child, you need not fear comparison to one who has passed beyond earthly concerns," she said kindly. "Eleanor lives now in memory and in the daughter she left behind. You live in the present moment, and in the future you will build together. Both loves are perfect in their own sphere." The blessing from his deceased wife's sister lifted a burden Gareth had not fully acknowledged carrying. He had feared that loving again somehow betrayed Eleanor's memory, but Margaret's words revealed the truth. Love honored love, regardless of its sequence. "There is another matter," Margaret continued with a slight smile. "I brought Eleanor's wedding dress, preserved for many years in the convent's care. She always hoped it might serve future generations of Ravenshollow brides." The offer overwhelmed Lyanna completely. To wear the gown of her predecessor seemed both honor and responsibility almost too great to bear. "I could not," she protested. "It would not be appropriate." "It would be perfect," Alara interrupted with the certainty of youth. "Mother would want you to wear it. She would want you to be part of our family in every way possible." From the mouth of his daughter came wisdom that settled the matter entirely. Eleanor lived on through Alara's generous heart, and if the child blessed this union, then all other concerns faded into insignificance. That evening, as final preparations continued around them, Gareth and Margaret walked the battlements under stars that had witnessed 3 generations of Ravenshollow marriages. "You choose well," she told him as they paused at the highest tower. "Lyanna possesses strength disguised as gentleness and wisdom hidden beneath youth. She will make you happy while helping you become the man Eleanor always knew you could be. I pray I prove worthy of such confidence." "Love makes us all worthy," Margaret replied with certainty, born from lifelong contemplation of divine mysteries. "Love transforms ordinary mortals into heroes capable of miracles." Tomorrow would test that theory as Gareth prepared to pledge his heart to someone who had already proven capable of working miracles in his life. Chapter 23. The Wedding Dawn. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, autumn sunlight streaming through Ravenshollow's windows like benediction from heaven itself. The great hall had been transformed into a chapel fit for royalty, with flowers gathered from every corner of the domain creating displays that rivaled the grandest cathedrals. Gareth stood before the altar wearing his finest doublet, the deep blue silk complementing his gray eyes, while silver thread caught the light like armor. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from overwhelming gratitude that life had granted him this second chance at happiness. Willem stood beside him as groomsman, the gruff captain moved to tears by the transformation he had witnessed in his lord over these past months. Where once stood a man frozen by grief, now waited a groom eager to embrace whatever joy the future might bring. The assembled guests filled every available space, neighbors and friends who had watched Gareth's long winter of sorrow and now celebrated his return to life. Even former adversaries had come to witness a love story that had become legend throughout the northern lands. Alara appeared first, scattering rose petals with the solemnity of someone entrusted with sacred duty. She wore a new gown of rose-colored silk that made her look older than her years, pride in her role as witness to her father's happiness shining from every gesture. Then came Lyanna, and the hall fell silent at her beauty. Eleanor's gown fit her perfectly, the ivory silk seeming to glow with inner light while ancient lace caught sunbeams like captured dreams. Margaret had adorned her hair with pearls that had belonged to generations of Ravenshollow brides, completing the transformation from refugee to noble lady. But it was her smile that truly transformed her, radiant with joy so pure it brought tears to eyes throughout the assembly. This was not a woman being given in marriage, but one choosing love with complete freedom and absolute confidence. Dearly beloved, Brother Thomas began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed hall, we gather to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other that perfect love which casts out fear. The ceremony proceeded with ancient words that carried new meaning when spoken over two people who had traveled such difficult paths to reach this moment. Each vow resonated with emotional truth that moved witnesses to tears of sympathy and joy. Do you, Alpha Gareth, take this woman as your lawful wife to love and protect, to honor and cherish in all circumstances that God may ordain? I do, Gareth replied, his voice strong despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. With all my heart, for all my days, I pledge myself to her happiness. Do you, Lady Lyanna, take this man as your lawful husband, to love and support, to honor and respect, trusting in his protection, and offering him your devotion? I do, she answered clearly, her green eyes never leaving his face. I choose him freely and completely, holding nothing back. The rings exchanged had been blessed by 3 priests and would soon be blessed by years of shared joy and sorrow. As Gareth slipped Eleanor's ring onto Lyanna's finger, he felt the circle close on one chapter of his life while opening another filled with infinite possibility. By the authority vested in me by the Holy Church and witnessed by this assembly, I pronounce you husband and wife, Brother Thomas declared with satisfaction. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The kiss that sealed their union was gentle at first, then deeper as the reality of their marriage struck them both. They were no longer two people finding comfort together. They were family, bonded by law and love, and the determination to build something beautiful from the ashes of past sorrow. Chapter 24, Celebration of Love. The wedding feast that followed exceeded even Alara's ambitious plans for celebration. Tables groaned beneath delicacies prepared by cooks who had worked for weeks to create a meal worthy of their lord's happiness. Wine flowed freely while musicians filled the hall with melodies that invited dancing and laughter. Gareth found himself smiling so continuously that his face began to ache, a pleasant soreness that reminded him how long it had been since joy had marked his features. Watching Lyanna charm his guests with her natural grace, he marveled at how completely she had integrated into his world. She fits as if she had been born to this place, Lord William observed, raising his cup in another toast to the bride's health. You chose well, my friend. Eleanor would be proud. The reference to his first wife no longer carried sting, but rather comfort. Eleanor lived on in the love that had shaped him into someone capable of loving again, her legacy preserved through the happiness she had taught him to recognize and cherish. Alara served as unofficial hostess, moving through the crowd with poise that suggested she had inherited her mother's social gifts along with her father's determination. She introduced Lyanna to guests, supervised the service of each course, and ensured that no visitor left without feeling welcomed and appreciated. Your daughter will make a formidable lady someday, Lyanna murmured as they watched Alara organize impromptu entertainment from traveling minstrels. She already does, Gareth replied with pride that felt entirely new. For the first time, he could see Alara's future stretching ahead filled with possibilities for happiness rather than shadows of loss that had haunted her childhood. The dancing began as afternoon faded toward evening, couples swirling through patterns that celebrated the joy of union while the bride and groom opened each set with grace that spoke of natural harmony between them. I never thought to dance at my own wedding, Lyanna confessed as they moved through the familiar steps. For so long, marriage seemed like prison rather than celebration. And now? Gareth asked, spinning her gracefully before drawing her close again. Now it feels like coming home to a place I never knew existed, she replied, her smile brilliant in the candlelight that had begun to supplement failing daylight. As evening settled over Raven's Hollow and guests gradually departed with bellies full and hearts warmed, the new family found themselves alone in the great hall that had witnessed so much sorrow transformed at last into a monument to love's triumph over despair. Are you happy, Father? Alara asked as they banked the fires and prepared to retire. Happier than I ever dared hope to be again, he answered honestly, gathering both his daughter and his wife into an embrace that encompassed his entire world. "Then Mother would be happy too," Alara declared with the certainty of a child who understood love's eternal nature. "She always wanted us to smile again." As they climbed the stairs together, father, daughter, and the woman who had completed their broken circle, Gareth offered silent thanks to whatever power had brought Lyanna to that forest clearing where their story began. Chapter 25, Epilogue. A New Beginning. 5 years had passed since that autumn wedding, and Raven's Hollow had become a place of laughter and life that surpassed even its golden days before Eleanor's death. The morning found Gareth in the training yard, but now he was not alone. 13-year-old Alara and 3-year-old James, his son with Lyanna, both watched from the walls with rapt attention. "Again, father," James called with the imperious demand of a toddler who had inherited both his parents' strong wills. "Make the sword fly," Gareth laughed, a sound that had become as natural as breathing over these years of contentment. He obliged his son by demonstrating a disarming technique that sent Willem's practice blades spinning through the air to land point first in a wooden post. "Impressive as always, my lord," Willem grinned, his hair now more gray than brown, but his skill undiminished. "Though I suspect young James will surpass us both when he comes of age. God willing, he will live in times peaceful enough that swords remain tools for exercise rather than survival," Gareth replied, though he would ensure his son learned every skill necessary to protect what mattered most. Alara had grown into the beauty her childhood had promised, her mother's grace combined with her father's strength of character, creating a young woman who drew suitors from across the kingdom. Yet she showed no hurry to marry, claiming she wished to study the management of estates under Lyanna's tutelage before taking on her own household responsibilities. "She grows more like you every day," Lyanna had observed the previous evening as they watched their daughter settle a dispute between servants with diplomacy that would have impressed seasoned negotiators. "She grows like herself," Gareth had corrected fondly, "which is the finest thing any child can become." Now, as he climbed the stairs to break his fast with his family, he reflected on how completely his life had changed since that day when desperate pleading from a child had convinced him to save a dying woman in the forest. The solar where he had once eaten in solitude now rang with conversation and laughter. Lyanna sat nursing baby Catherine, their 6-month-old daughter, whose arrival had surprised them both with its easy joy. Alara helped James with his letters while regaling them all with stories from her morning ride through the domain. "The eastern fields show excellent progress," she reported with the same thoroughness Gareth might have used. "Another good harvest seems assured, and the new families you settled there last spring have proven as industrious as their recommendations suggested." "Excellent," Gareth replied, settling beside his wife and accepting the cup of ale she offered. "And what of the bridge repairs?" "Completed yesterday," Lyanna answered, shifting Catherine to her shoulder with practiced ease. "The stonemasons you hired proved worth every penny spent." This was partnership in its truest form, 2 people working together to build something greater than either could achieve alone. The lesson had not been lost on Alara, who watched her stepmother with admiration and attention that promised she would carry these examples into her own future relationships. "Father," Alara said suddenly, her expression growing serious, "Lord William's messenger arrived this morning with an invitation to his daughter's wedding next month. Shall we attend?" "Of course," Gareth replied. "William stood by me during my darkest days. We owe him presents at his brightest." "It will be good to travel again," Lyanna mused, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Though I confess I prefer returning to Raven's Hollow over departing from it." "Home," Gareth agreed, understanding exactly what she meant. "This place has become home in ways I never expected." As morning progressed into day and the familiar rhythms of castle life surrounded them, Gareth often paused to marvel at the abundance that had grown from those desperate moments in Thornwood Forest. A dying woman, a child's tears, a father's reluctant mercy. Such small things to build happiness upon, yet they had proven foundation enough for love that would last lifetimes. The man who had sworn never to love again had discovered that some vows were meant to be broken. Some walls were meant to fall, and some hearts were meant to be opened regardless of the risk. In choosing love over safety, vulnerability over control, hope over despair, he had found not the devastation he feared, but the redemption he had never dared seek. Looking around the solar at his wife's gentle smile, his children's bright,